Hi everyone, and welcome to the Allplane Podcast, where we talk with the movers and shakers that are redefining the future of commercial aviation. As usual, before we start, I would like to remind you that all previous episodes of this podcast, as well as many other aviation stories, are available on the Allplane website. That's Allplane.tv, Allplane.tv. In this podcast, we have often talked about eVTOLs and advanced air mobility. We have had here some of the most prominent entrepreneurs and visionaries, I think it's fair to call them visionaries, of this new industry. But one aspect of the upcoming eVTOL revolution that we haven't talked nearly as much about is that of vertiports. Vertiports are, to say it plainly, a bit like airports but for eVTOLs. And just as the airport experience is an essential component of air travel, vertiports are expected to be a key element as well of the advanced air mobility experience. But how exactly? Is boarding an eVTOL going to be more like going to the airport? Or is it going to be more like hailing a taxi ride on the street or taking the underground or the urban bus? There's still so much that we don't know about the advanced air mobility experience. And of course, the rules and regulations will play a major role in shaping how all of this comes into being in different jurisdictions and will most likely result in an unequal development of advanced air mobility across countries and cities, as well as different timeframes for the adoption of this new technology. So, to talk about all this, today here on the podcast, we've got Addison Ferrell. Addison is the Director of Infrastructure and Head of the Americas at Skyports, one of the world's leading vertiport development companies. Before joining Skyports, Addison worked for blue-chip companies such as GE Aerospace, the maker of aircraft engines, and McKinsey, the world-famous consultancy firm. And today, Addison oversees the development of pioneering vertiport projects all over the world, together with some of the major players in this space. Just to give you some examples, some prominent projects where Skyports has been involved include the 2024 Paris Olympics or Dubai's futuristic air mobility vision. So tune in for a fascinating glimpse of the advanced air mobility experience of the future, and let me welcome Addison to the podcast. Hello, Addison. How are you?
Well, I'm well. Thank you.
Great to have you here on the podcast. You're joining us from Boston, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Great city. You are the Director of Infrastructure at Skyports, which is a global leader in the development of vertiports, a piece of infrastructure that is expected to play a major role in shaping this new era of advanced air mobility that is coming to us, 2025, 26, 27. There's plenty of eVTOL developers out there that are working on their certifications, and some are planning to launch services really soon. The key question here is, we talk a lot about the aircraft. We've got a few eVTOL developers here on the podcast, but I think there is not that much information about how the experience is going to be on the ground and how are we going to access those advanced air mobility services. So that's why I think it's very important to have you here today so that you can share some insights about this. But first of all, like every guest in the podcast, I would like to ask you to introduce yourself and to tell us a little bit more about who you are and what's your role at Skyports, and also a bit about your previous background and how you ended up in this very interesting industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed this opportunity. Yeah, I began my career in aerospace and have followed that passion throughout. So what I do now as Director of Infrastructure, I lead Skyports infrastructure business, and I can speak more about what that means. But it's a global remit. I'm based here in the U.S., as you said, so I think more of a hands-on role here in our U.S. market, but involved globally in the various markets we're in, and as well as the product development that we do. As I mentioned, I started in aerospace. So I started as a design engineer at GE Aviation in their Cincinnati headquarters, doing mechanical design for jet engines, military and commercial, different parts of the engine. So it was really fascinating. It's a fascinating product. It's a fascinating business as well. Really key to driving the growth of aerospace globally. Even if you were to just take the perspective of efficiency and green initiatives, it's quite remarkable how far that industry, that product, the jet engine, has come in the past.
Yeah, if I may add a note here, there's some very interesting documentaries. I think they are on YouTube. I don't remember the title exactly, but it's easy to Google them. about how the jet engines are made, and it's really fascinating the amount of intricacy that goes into those engines, the sophistication of the mechanisms and the materials and everything, how it's designed. That's really amazing, like mind blowing.
Yeah.
So I'll try to find them and I will post them on the podcast notes, because I think that's something that anyone that is interested in aviation should be watching those. Amazing. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you here,
Absolutely.
so I'll give you.
No,
I'll
it's
pass
all
you.
right. I'm
Yeah.
biased. And I agree. It was a fascinating way to start my career. I think technically it's just such a cool product. It's a really interesting challenge, and it's an example of a lot of what you see in aerospace, where it's really advanced and leading edge, has a massive impact on people around the globe, and it's a very tightly coupled system. You change one small parameter in one part of the engine, maybe in the compressor, you change the number of stages in the compressor, can have a massive impact on the entire system. That's a theme that we can talk about with AAM as well. Just as an ecosystem, how it's very tightly coupled. So I had a great experience there at GE Aviation for a while. And while I really enjoyed it and was very technical, I was looking to make a bit of a pivot and take a slightly different role following that. So I went into consulting at McKinsey following that for several years to be less in the technical details and more looking at strategic and operational lens at business as a whole. I really touched various industrial type companies, both strategic and operational topics, but my emphasis was always on aerospace. It's always where
We had a McKinsey partner here on the podcast a few months ago, Robin Riddle, who is very active actually in the advanced air mobility space, and has participated in the elaboration of some reports and some really interesting studies about this industry. So yeah,
Robin's great. He's really a thought leader within AAM. Absolutely.
So, and now you are, after McKinsey, you move on to Skyports.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Skyports is just, for me, it was kind of the perfect intersection of something that's really innovative. It's that industry passion that I have, and frankly, the team that I really liked. It's matters so much in the job that we do. So I felt really fortunate to come into.
You define yourself, Skyports, as a global leader in vertiport development. I would say, let's start by vertiport. A vertiport would be like an airport for the advanced air mobility aircraft that are being developed. So that would be the eVTOLs, what's popularly known as flying taxis, although that's a name that is not very popular in the industry, because maybe it's a bit too simple to define it this way. But I think it's a very visual image that many people can understand very quickly. So you are developing this infrastructure, but what exactly is your business model? Because you are designers. Are you planning to operate them? Are you planning to invest directly? Tell us a bit more about Skyports and what's the role that you play in this new infrastructure, this new network of facilities that is designed to service this new industry. If eVTOLs deliver everything that's been promised, infrastructure, travel habits will change, etc. So what's your role in all this story?
Yes, so I first of all agree that vertiports are like, I guess you can think of them as miniature airports in urban landscapes, or like heliports, really, because we don't have runways, we have landing pads. But it's that ground connection for the passenger or the cargo to the aircraft that's flying. So in a simplistic term, you don't need to think of it as much different than that. But we can talk about the complexities that come along with it. From a business model perspective, it's actually quite consistent with what we see elsewhere in aviation. We're talking about landing fees, recharging fees, now maybe electric charging as opposed to Jet A fuel, but fundamentally kind of the same idea. Hangarage, very light maintenance or cleaning, and other ancillary fees to the operator of the aircraft itself, plus the non-aeronautical revenue that you can capture as that ground infrastructure provider. So all those things are entirely consistent with what you see elsewhere, be it large hub airports or FBOs at a smaller GA airport. Quite consistent business model on the revenue side. Now for Skyports, we're end to end in terms of what scope we cover. What we start all the way upstream at the network design and site selection within a given market, then move into the concept design, permitting, detailed design, construction, and ultimately the ongoing operation of the facility once there's a commercial launch. So that's what we think of when we think of end to end. So we're investing up front in all of that, concept design through detailed design as well as the construction itself. So we're very much like a real estate developer in that sense. We invest a fair bit of capital up front, and then the ongoing operation of it that of course has operational costs as well. So that's our investment, and then I mentioned our revenue stream being the landing fees and the like. So again, quite consistent with other parts of aviation.
I think you're a startup in a way, right? You were founded not long ago.
Yes, that's right. That's right. We were founded about 5 years ago in London by a couple of our co-founders. It was we were founded in response to the emerging AAM industry, to seeing that, okay, we have this new technology that will allow electric flight and distributed electric propulsion to be far quieter and safer and more economical, and that opens up opportunities for more air taxi operations within dense urban areas. It was a recognition early on from our founders, Duncan Walker and Simon Morris. Well, there needs to be somewhere for those aircraft to land, and so they founded Skyports to develop those. Now, I'll admit, Duncan would admit too, early on it was a little bit more of a land grab. Like, oh, we need a flat place to land. It's 20 feet square, or something like that, 20 feet on the side. Well, quickly realizing it's more complicated than that. Quite a bit of technical complexity that's involved. So as the industry has matured, so have we as a company. We have quite a bit of technical expertise in house now, and we're involved in many markets around the globe. Headquartered in London, that's kind of where our technical team resides, and we do have commercial interests in the London market, but also in US, Middle East, Singapore, France, Italy, Japan. So anywhere where we see AAM and eVTOL operations launching early on, that's where we have a presence. But yeah, back to your original question about us being a startup, we really founded roughly 5 years ago. We have great support from strategic investors.
You have venture funding or VC funding?
Not much VC, really. I mean, frankly, it's primarily strategic funders, the likes of Group ADP, huge airport owner and operator in France. Similarly, F2I, airport owner and operator in Italy. Irelandia Aviation, that's the family office of the Ryan family. So Ryanair, Allegiant, Viva Colombia, etc. So another one, Goodman Group, they do real estate for logistics globally. So that's where almost the entirety of our funding comes from. Yes, it's great to have the capital from them, but also they bring a fantastic deal of expertise and synergies with their core operations, both in infrastructure and aviation and beyond. So we feel really fortunate to have that group of investors.
Yeah, you mentioned actually one of the points that I had here in my list to ask you, and that's the technical complexity, because, well, this eVTOL revolution, which is sold on the basis of convenience in part, not only, but convenience plays a major role in the appeal of this new way of moving around. What are the requirements? Because looking from the outside and without getting into the technical aspects, it looks like you don't need much to operate, to move around in one of those vehicles, because you can take off and land pretty much from everywhere. It's pretty quiet in general, and it's expected to be pretty quiet. We don't know if the regulation will also adapt to that, or will still have the same sort of framework that we have now in many places, because of helicopters are noisy. So there are some restrictions there. So what is the barrier of entry to operating a network of such facilities? Because if you can take off and land from pretty much anywhere, what would prevent other operators, if you have some space on a urban setting, just set up some basic facility? And maybe put some services, maybe put some, I don't know, some check-in counter or some bar or something like that, and just allow these vehicles to take off and land. I don't know if it's a legal restriction, a technical restriction, and how big is this barrier of entry?
I think I'd agree in the absence of a built environment, it's quite simple. You know, if you're talking about just in an undeveloped area, picking out places to land and process people, it's pretty simple. Of course, that's not what we're dealing with. I mean, the whole point is to integrate this into the built environment. The denser the environment, the better, because that's higher demand and greater need for air taxi operations. So I think about the complexity on a few different dimensions. One would be just development period. You think about dense cities and how hard it is to build something new in those heavily populated areas. I come from the U.S., so I'm particularly kind of bringing a Western mindset to this, but it's not easy to get development done in a place like Los Angeles. I mean, people will say that time and again. So
Yeah.
just fundamentally any kind of development. So that's one barrier. It's non-trivial. Another would be very much aviation related. There's integration into the airspace that absolutely has to be considered. Not only obstacles, you know, the local environment right around the vertiport, but also just making sure the class of airspace you're dealing with and the other flight routes that are nearby. You know, if you're near the LAX approach path, like that's going to be a problem as an example. So that's very much aviation considered, as well as just the safety of it itself. The size of the FATA, you know, the size of the landing pad matters. The FAA has put out some design guidance, and in most U.S. states and cities that kind of follow that guidance. So there's very much an aviation related barrier to entry there. Another one I'd point out would be like I'll call it physics, or, you know, the power grid. You're talking about getting quite a lot of power on site. It's, you know, A, expensive, B, may just be unachievable to some locations where you might otherwise consider. And then the last one here that I'll list, which isn't the last one to consider, but last one I'll list for now, would be just a consideration of the passenger journey. Sure, you can land on top of let's say a skyscraper, for example. Might be very windy, so you might not want to from an aviation perspective. But let's say from an aviation perspective, you could. That passenger journey might be really bad, actually, because you're talking about going 60 stories up in an elevator that is shared with all the tenants in the building. And in order to get onto the rooftop, you're climbing a ladder and going through a hatch. None of those things actually are all that conducive to someone who ultimately just wants to save time. You might not save them that much time as a result. So again, those are just, you know, a good deal. The factors to consider, and the complexities that in many cases are the coupled. You impact your ability to do development somewhere if you do it in a location that does have a good passenger journey versus not.
And what about let's say, security restrictions? Right now at the airport, you have to allow for a considerable amount of time to go through all the security, check-in, etc. I don't know if that's also a requirement in the eVTOL experience. Your vertiports are going to be, let's say, equipped to handle all these steps in a process, or you don't anticipate this to be a requirement in the case of the eVTOL experience?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say it. I wish I could say it's one answer globally, but it's not. It's very much a jurisdiction by jurisdiction approach. In the U.S., to use that as an example, the size of eVTOLs are under the threshold above which the TSA has jurisdiction and does the passenger screening and so forth. So there would not be that requirement, and you would not need to go through any sort of metal detector, you know, formal screening in that sense. In other jurisdictions like Singapore, as an example, because it's aviation related and you're talking about accessing the airspace, they do have stricter controls, and you do have to screen passengers in a similar way to what you'd have to do in a hub airport. So our goal is that we don't have to put passengers through that screening, because it's of course a friction in their overall journey that they would prefer to avoid. However, we do intend to put other measures in place to ensure that the overall security, the security of the overall system is still considered. For example, access control. Mm-hmm. If only the people who are ticketed and are escorted by a staff member are allowed onto the airfield, that does a lot by way of security, even if we haven't gone through the TSA level screening. So, that's just one example. CCTV recording, would be another one, that sort of thing. There's a whole set of things that you can consider when it comes to security. But our goal certainly is to implement things in a way that have as low of a burden and a friction on the passengers as possible.
Mm-hmm. Are there jurisdictions or cities or countries that are more, let's say, vertiport or eVTOL friendly than others? And I don't know if they can be named at this stage.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sort of comes down to, I don't want to say obvious factors, but in let's sort of take one major distinction would be if you have kind of a Western or a democratic free market environment where development can absolutely be influenced by feedback from the local community, that's going to be more challenging than not. So in the US, in most cities and states, there's the opportunity for local groups to protest or provide feedback, for any new development. I mean, completely unrelated to whether it's air taxis, any development whatsoever. And that can really slow down the development process. Whereas if you're talking about a place like UAE in the Middle East, Dubai, that doesn't really exist in the same way. It's much more of a top-down centralized decision-making process where something is going to be built. It's built. It doesn't matter so much if the neighbors protest. So for early launch of something new like this, it does help to be somewhere where you can have much more centralized decision-making in a place like Dubai.
Yeah, you announced a major project in Dubai recently, I think a few weeks ago. Was it in April, I think, or something like that?
Well, yeah, in February is when we kind of got approval from His Highness Sheikh Mohammed in Dubai for the design of our network that we're building out in collaboration with the Roads and Transport Authority there.
Is this going to be the first major implementation of your know-how, your concepts?
Yeah, I mean, within Skyports, and if we're talking about sort of a net new network of vertiports, yes, we believe it'll be kind of the first full-scale network of vertiports in the world that has commercial operations. And it's super helpful that you have a place that really likes to be innovative. Dubai is all about addressing innovative topics. They're willing to invest their money and their broader resources behind it, and they can streamline that decision-making process as we just talked about relative to other places.
So how this network is going to work? Can you tell us a bit more about it?
Yeah, so we've got four locations that at this stage we're talking about launching in the early years. The international airport, so DXB, Palm Jumeirah, downtown, and Dubai Marina. So those are the four locations, starting with DXB and Palm Jumeirah as kind of phase one. But yeah, we'll roll them out targeting 2025, ready for launch, at least for those first two. And then the others will come online after that. Ultimately, we're looking at the broader UAE as a longer term opportunity for a network. We think it's a great place to build a broader network. But our partnership with the RTA has been fantastic, and launching with them in Dubai, we feel like will be the best way to get operations running.
Are the air operators going to be ready by that date?
Yeah, so I mean, at this stage, Joby has been in talks with the RTA about operating there, and they're, I think, widely regarded as kind of the leader in terms of time to certify an eVTOL for operating. So absolutely, the timing of when we invest and when we roll out, when we launch, will be metered based on the operator. If it's Joby, it'll be based on their timeline as an example. Both when they can certify and then when they can produce the aircraft to be put in market. So that's why we say we're targeting 2025. But as is entirely the case with our business, generally speaking, Dubai or otherwise, it's very much metered by the progress of the OEMs. So we work very closely to be hand in hand with them, so that we're not putting our business, at too much risk. We need to absolutely invest on the right timeline that matches up with their timeline to certification and commercialization.
Mm-hmm. And let's say this goes ahead. Who's the best candidate for second to follow suit with development rollout of Vertiports and eVTOL operations? Yeah, globally.
The next market after that?
Yeah. Like
Okay.
city or country that might follow.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. So the fact that we feel like that's going to be sort of the first scaled network doesn't mean that we're not active in all those other locations I mentioned earlier. We very much see what is happening in Paris heading up to the Olympics. That'll be a great showcase. It'll be a great showcase.
But that's 2024. Is it going to be ready by that early? Because that's even earlier than the dates we were discussing for Dubai.
So, frankly speaking, I can't comment on Volocopter's readiness to launch it at that time. I know they're working hard. They've done many flight demonstrations already. I've seen one. So I'm confident they can do something. I can't comment on. I don't know exactly what that will entail at the time of the Olympics, but in any event, I think it'll be great for the industry. I think following Dubai, frankly speaking, it's a little bit hard to say where it'll sit next. But just to take a bit of a U.S. view, I do think New York will be relatively early in the grand scheme of things, just because they have air taxi operations today. Blade, FlexJet, they fly. Others are flying air taxis from Manhattan to the airports and out to the Hamptons and Montauk. On a daily basis. Like this last weekend in the U.S. was Memorial Day weekend. Massive time for people to be flying out to their vacation homes. So can you just do a drop-in replacement of some helicopter operations for eVTOL operations? A little bit oversimplifying it for sure, but to a certain extent that will be possible. And I think that you'll see some pretty good uptake from the outset.
Are you Vertiports all following the same? Is there like a standard design, or is something that is custom made for each location? Well, I guess there's always some level of customization, I guess, because of the local conditions, whatever. But is there like a standard blueprint that you more or less try to adapt whenever possible?
We have some pretty consistent design. We have a pretty consistent design philosophy, and we try to maintain as much consistency as possible in things like our software systems, our information systems that have less need to be adapted to the local environment. Like the shape of the airfield, for example.
Yeah.
As much as I'd say we like to just copy paste that from one place to the next, that's not going to be possible in many situations, because you're talking about fitting something into a constrained, dense urban environment, which by definition is going to come in different shapes and sizes from one site to the next and one market to the next.
Is there a standard size, more or less, or a minimum size requirement?
Well, there is a minimum size requirement if you were to look at guidelines put out by both FAA and EASA on the FATO, the final approach and takeoff, the landing pad itself. So that can't go any smaller if we're going to abide by those regulations. You can have many FATOs. You can have one FATO and many parking stands, which is generally speaking kind of like one FATO, 3 parking stands, like generally speaking, a fairly efficient design. So that alone will dictate the vast majority of the space take. The terminal itself is not going to be some massive grand terminal, on par with Heathrow. It's going to be much more utilitarian, and in and of itself is not going to dictate a whole lot of the space take.
In a case like Dubai, what sort of sizes are we talking about in terms of surface involved?
Yeah, I mean, if you take those various things into consideration, it's sort of a medium-sized vertiport in terms of throughput. You're looking on the order of 40 to 50,000 square feet minimum. You could probably go down a little bit from there and maybe be constrained on number of stands or get creative with the size of and shape of the terminal. And you can certainly go up from there to 100, 120, 150,000 square feet if you want to really maximize as much throughput as possible. So in a dense urban area, that's a fair bit of space. But when you compare it to the size of airports, that's tiny in comparison.
And what amount of passengers are we talking about? What's the sort of traffic that is expected? Can you service several eVTOLs at the same time? Also the sort of, let's say, LAN connections that you need to the rest of the network, the transport network.
Yeah. First and foremost, in the early years, we're gonna be supply constrained by aircraft, I would say. It's gonna be less about really busy vertiports because we have so many aircraft, more about the constraint of the number of aircraft. But over time, that balance will shift, and that's part of the reason why we put in a lot of effort to design vertiports that are as efficient and high throughput as possible. If you're getting on the order of 5 to upwards of 10 landings an hour, let's say, we're talking about roughly 4 passengers per aircraft. So you can start to do the math on the number of passengers that we're talking about at any given site. It's not going to replace mass transit. I mean, just the number of people you can put in a metro train compared to the number of people you can put in an aircraft are radically different. It's not going to take thousands of cars off the road, but we do think it'll be a beneficial part and complement the overall transport network. It's utilizing underutilized asset being the airspace. It's no operating emissions. It's quiet. So we feel like it has a place in the broader transport system, even if the numbers aren't going to be quite on par with some other parts of transportation in the city.
Mm-hmm. What's a sort of investment that you need to set up one vertiport in a, let's say, let's take the example of Dubai, for example, of this order of magnitude?
Yeah, I hate giving the answer of it depends, but that's sort of what it is here, because you can talk about a very small ground-based version that's little more than a piece of concrete, a charger, and a shed for someone to walk through. Or you can talk about a raised structure, just because it might need to be given the location it's placed, with a very large airfield and quite a bit of amenities inside the terminal. We very much try to take the approach of being cost efficient and reducing the landing fees for our customer, so they can ultimately bring the cost down for the passenger and really catalyze this market for the masses. So we don't try to go $1,000 if we don't have to for some reason. But as a result of all those various factors and the fact that you're building it within an existing built environment, you can be talking about something that's ranges from as low as a few $1 million up to north of $20 million if you have to build an underlying structure that it's on top of, and so forth. So that would not be typical. It'd be typically be much less than that. But when you sort of compare that to airports, once again, we're talking about much smaller. So it's much smaller in space, much smaller in investment than airports as well. Really meant to be fit for purpose for this market.
I see. Okay, so you have all these plans around the world to set up this physical infrastructure, but there's another aspect I would like to ask you about, and that's the IT and the systems. Because on your website you said that you mentioned that as one of your let's say key differential points. Are you guys also developing the IT that supports all this type of operation?
Yeah, absolutely. Because we will be operating these assets on a go-forward basis, we're building the technology behind that to enable those operations. It's kind of like three different pillars as we think of it. First is the identity management, so ensuring appropriate access control for passengers to come in and out of the vertiport terminal and onto the airfield. That's first. Second is the situational awareness, and that's really about safety around the vertiport, making sure that we understand that there's clear FATO, the stands are clear, the vicinity, the very nearby airspace, understanding if there are other aircraft or even drones that might be going through it, as well as things like weather stations and camera feeds, which we'll share with our aircraft operator partners. Then the third is the resource management and scheduling system. And that's scheduling the resources on the ground. So the availability of a stand for an aircraft to come and park and recharge at it. The availability of a staff member to go help out somewhere. Importantly, the availability of a FATO for someone to come in and land. So that's not dispatching flights, to be very clear. That's the role of the aircraft operator, but it's for us to say whether or not there's a slot available for them at the vertiport. So those kind of the three main pillars we think of, and then there's of course all of the enabling IT infrastructure behind it. And we have developers and other IT engineers on staff that are helping us to build that entire system, the remote operations of vertiports as well, so that we can minimize the burden in any individual location and enable us to really operate from a central location as much as possible.
Okay, so you are like a software company as well.
Yeah. I mean, we certainly work hard to make sure that what we're developing is driven by the needs of our customers and the regulators and the environment we're operating in. But absolutely, we're developing our own suite of software and integrations with existing software too, to make it a bespoke solution.
For people that wish to, let's say, keep on top of what's going on in this field, what would be the next milestones that you would say we should be looking for, both for Vertiports and for the industry in general?
Yeah, on the infrastructure side, we're hard at work in those markets that I mentioned. So milestones that you'll hear and see about will be confirmed locations that have been identified and have some degree of approval from the local authorities. So I think that's something that you should expect to be seeing and hearing about in some of the major launch markets globally in the next couple of years. But importantly, as I also mentioned, the pace at which we can and should advance on the vertiport side is very much dictated by the progress towards certification and commercialization of the aircraft themselves. So I'd say, watching as those aircraft make their way towards certification, which they're on a great path now. The regulators have been really engaged, as far as we can tell, and helpful in outlining a clear roadmap for them. But seeing those eVTOL OEMs tick through their certification roadmap will really be what also helps dictate the timeline for the vertiports as well.
And for the Skyports in particular, are there specific milestones that you are expecting in the near future?
Yeah, we've really built a world-class team over the past few years, and we plan to continue to grow that team. We closed our Series B in 2022. We'll embark on our next round of fundraising by the end of this year to continue growing the team and start some of those initial developments.
How much are you raising?
It'll be a little bit dependent on the feedback we get from the market. It's sort of widely known that it's a tough funding environment out there. So we'll react to what the market will bear and what our existing shareholders are interested in. But it'll be on the order of $50 to $100 million USD, most likely. Yeah, I'd say for us, it's about continuing to grow that team judiciously, to focus on those launch markets, as I mentioned, where we have opportunities for more near-term development, like Dubai, to be pouring our time and investment into that, and then also to continue on with existing commercial operations where possible. I didn't mention this, but we own and operate a heliport in London itself. So that
you are operating already.
Yeah, it's a heliport. It's traditional helicopters. One of two civil heliports in the city of London. Okay. So
is there some know-how that you are deriving from this operation that you plan to apply to the eVTOL sector?
Absolutely. And that's a key part of our strategy, is to translate that know-how into eVTOL ops, which in many ways will be quite similar. But it helps us understand things like working with the local community because it's right in the middle of a residential area and helicopters are quite loud.
Where about exactly is it located?
It's very close to Canary Wharf,
Okay.
right on the Thames.
Okay.
So yeah, we learn about kind of the local integration, working with regulators, working with the operators of the aircraft themselves. They're our customers, developing a non-aeronautical revenue strategy. So just to name a few, safety in airfield operations. So quite a few things that we have the opportunity to learn through that.
Okay. And before we wrap it up, what is the best online resource where people can go to and learn about Skyports? Please remind us your website, or I don't know if there are other channels that you would recommend as well.
Yeah, no, our website's a great place to track what's going on. We'll post news and press releases there. So it's skyports.net. And then we're also present at conferences and industry events like the Paris Air Show. We'll have a booth there as an example, and other major industry gatherings we tend to be a part of. So would love to be in touch with anyone who's interested in learning more. But I kind of point you to those two resources to start.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Addison, for this very comprehensive overview of this very interesting and emerging industry. I'm sure we're gonna keep hearing a lot more about in the coming years. Thank you so much. Before you go, and if you like this podcast, a quick reminder that it would be absolutely great if you could please give it a rating on Apple, Spotify, or whichever platform you're using, or recommend it to a friend or whomever might be interested. Thank you very much, and see you soon.